Welcome back to the BoshNRoll channel. It is the long-awaited November 10th ban and restricted update, and I'm here to talk about it. This is not a live reaction. The ban's been live for a couple hours now. I've made some notes. I've thought about it. It is still fresh. The live stream that they do the day after a BNR update has not come out yet because that happens tomorrow, which is today when you're watching this. If you want the full additional thoughts once we have that additional information and more time to think about it and a couple days of metagame shakeout, the Eternal Glory podcast will also be covering it this week. The bans themselves, I'll talk a little bit about each format, or at least each real format. What even is Alchemy? I don't know. But standard, obviously, the Vivi Cauldron deck was completely busted. Prophecydetic Memory hanging out in the background as a core engine of that. And then they hit Screaming Nemesis as well to nerf Mono Red, which was one of the better decks, even competing with Vivi Cauldron. I had seen calls from standard creators, which I'm less in touch with, but some folks like Carlo MTG and even on the Resleevables podcast, Patrick Sullivan and Patrick Chapin had been talking about longer lists of standard bans, like 6-8 cards, to really shake it up and get it to a healthy place. Wizards of the Coast for the past several years, especially when we talk about Legacy, have taken a do less policy. Like if the community could point to 6 cards, they'll take 2 and just try to do the least, which I understand the reasons for that from their perspective, even though it can be frustrating sometimes. These standard bans obviously hit the 2 most important decks, and I don't play a lot of standard, but I am qualified for the RC next spring or late winter, whenever that is. So I will have to think about this eventually. Pioneer Heartfire Hero. The last time I played Pioneer was a regional championship last year. It was a long time ago, but I do remember this mono red or Rakdos Fling deck being really annoying. But Pioneer has not been a competitive format for over a year now due to what they chose to make the regional championship seasons. And I don't really have thoughts on this because I have not played the format. Modern, no changes. This one, I was on the fence about. I do think Amulet has reached a point where it is both better than it was and normal people are picking it up. And by that, I mean it's not just Dom Harvey and a small group of ringers showing up with Amulet. People now really understand how to play it at just kind of the store level, and that's been the deck when I play Modern that I've been having the least fun and feeling like I have the least chance to interact with. But they do mention it a little bit that they have their eye on it in the full paragraph section below. But I'm not really upset about anything with Modern. I'll skip Legacy for a minute because that's what I'm going to talk about for the entire video. Vintage, no changes. Love that. Eternal Weekend had 7.5 different decks in the top 8. There was a dozen or more different decks that could have won that tournament. Vintage is awesome. No changes. I love it. Pauper High Tide is banned. High Tide both wasn't that popular and wasn't winning that much, but it was miserable to execute. I have not read the full Pauper thing. I'm sure Gavin wrote several books about it, but I'm not that invested in High Tide and Pauper, so I'm not going to talk about that very much. In general, I think Pauper is great. And then to the main event, Legacy. Entomb is banned. Nadu, Winged Wisdom are banned. My Legacy wish list for bans was Tamiyo at number 1, who is not banned. The One Ring at number 2, who is not banned. Nadu was my number 3, who did get banned. And then Entomb was a flex slot. Like, if they think they can get Reanimator online while protecting Entomb, it's a cool card to exist. But if they can't figure it out, then just ban Entomb. I was, 51-49 in favor of keeping Entomb. Like, no sleep will be lost that Entomb is gone, and it is certainly the safest way to not have another 6 months of Reanimator dominance. Let's get down to the actual segment on Legacy. On the way down, scrolling down here before I forget to talk about it, we plan to move towards a more frequent announcement cadence to adjust formats as necessary. This is great. They mentioned that over a month ago in the pre-ban letting us know that they changed the release date and Vivi would be banned article that they released. Unprecedented, releasing over a month before they banned a card, letting us know the card would be banned. But we're in strange times. And one of the biggest criticisms about this ban window was that it was 5 months. That's almost half a year where they tie their hands and say, whatever happens, happens. And what happened was Vivi Cauldron. What happened was Dimir Reanimator. It was a messed up situation. Like, the formats weren't even good. Like, if you're doing great and you say, we can let this ride for almost half a year, I get it. But if the formats are bad and you let it ride for half a year, that's kind of a double error. So the next ban update will be February 9th, which is about 3.5 months, which is about a quarter of a year. Quarterly updates feel so much better than twice a year. That's almost double the cadence from the window we had this time around to work with. So great job on that. All right, scrolling past all these formats that we don't need to read all these words about. I will pause on the amulet section. They did give it a couple paragraphs here. Remains tier 1 through metagames that include several banned cards. There's a copy pasta on the internet if you haven't seen it. That's basically like Amulet has remained tier 1 through Hogak, Underworld Breach, etc., and remains legal because it's hard to play. They do mention the Shifting Woodland Aftermath Analyst combo that now exists in the deck to go actually infinite very quickly. The folks who are more invested in Modern than me, I just had a vibe that Amulet might be too good. The people with real opinions seem to think that Aftermath Analyst would have been a good ban to cut the infinite combo out of Amulet while leaving the deck intact. And they did at least mention this. This is kind of an interesting sentence that they typed out. This sort of combo isn't inherently problematic, but we are becoming increasingly aware of some tournament logistical issues that can arise with a deck as complicated as Amulet Titan when its win rate necessitates widespread adoption in the format. This is another way of saying it's too slow in the hand of dummies, kind of. Like when it was just Dom Harvey and his friends playing the deck with high competence, it was fine. But if the deck is obviously good enough that people should be learning it and playing it, either executing it slowly or just a critical mass of there's so many Amulet players in every Modern tournament that rounds are going to take a long time. Interesting sentence. But we can move on from that. And here are the words that were written about Legacy. After significant time and effort to preserve the iconic Entomb and Reanimate play pattern of Legacy, the time has come to lay this one to rest. I'm not going to read all this word for word. You can read the article if you want, but the acknowledgement that Entomb has become an iconic Legacy card, it honestly pains me to say that as I mouse over the Entomb and it shows me an Avatar bonus sheet card that hasn't even come out yet. Avatar The Last Airbender is definitely what I think about when I think about iconic Legacy cards. Just show me the Odyssey one so I can make this video. God damn it. But anyway, they did acknowledge the experience of casting Entomb and Reanimate is an iconic Legacy thing. Entomb was banned when Legacy first became a format. It was unbanned, I believe, in 2010. It quickly led to the banning of Mystical Tutor. It was clear that Mystical Tutor and Entomb together were too good. Mystical Tutor got banned slightly after Entomb got unbanned, and we were good for 13.5 years. But the problem is, as they talk about below, Entomb used to allow for a toolbox of monsters that could solve various problems. Inkwell Leviathan, Archon of Valor's Reach, Tidespout Tyrant. I know I've played cards like Terastodon and Realm Razor and Imperial Archangel. These are all cards I've cast Entomb on in my Legacy career over the years. And the condensation of Archon of Cruelty and Atraxa are just, these are the best two. They cover most things. We don't need to wonder if we need to turn off a card type or have a difficult to interact with creature, because Atraxa just does both of these things, kind of. And there were people out there saying that, ban Atraxa and or Archon, and then we get to keep Entomb. But that leaves the door open for the next time they want to print some cool, big, splashy, mythic, rare monster in any set ever, whether it's a Commander release or Universes Beyond, or if it actually comes through Standard the way that Atraxa did, then they're just going to ban every monster forever. This is the same reason Survival of the Fittest is banned. That card was sweet in Legacy for a very long time, and then there became a critical mass of new creatures that made it unsweet, in fact, problematic. And that's why Survival is banned. And this sentence right here says it all pretty well. Entomb's incentives in deck building make it too easy to leverage high-impact threats without having to commit to the fail states that normally come with synergistic enabler plus payoff combo deck. Yep, that is how it feels. The 2-monster package with the established 4 Entomb, 4 Reanimate, 1 Animate Dead. That's an 11-card package that you could put your other 49 cards around to do whatever else you want while still being able to go nuts at any moment. It is too efficient, and the fail rate is pretty low. I think they did the right thing here. There's kind of a strange segue here where it's our hope that players who prefer to use the version of this deck that uses days and cantrips to play the battlefield will be able to continue to do so with Izzet Delver and Dimir Tempo. I think that I understand what they mean, which is that using cantrips to set up Atraxa and then Days and Force of Will to protect her is like setting up a Delver of Secrets than using Days and Force of Will to protect it. However, not really. It's more like using Days and Force of Will to protect Doomsday. So the segue into Izzet Delver and Dimir Tempo still exists is a strange one to me, but I mean, those decks do still exist. And then here they say, if you like cheating in big monsters, there's other way to do that. There's the Sneak and Show. Natural Order is still legal. Green Sun Zenith is still legal. There's other stuff you can do. It's not as efficient as Entomb, but that's the point. The BoshNRoll channel is brought to you by Tales of Adventure. WOAH-magic.com has almost 100,000 unique cards in stock. They offer free track shipping on every order, plus next day or 2-day options when you have an event coming up fast. They offer on-site pickup at major Magic events throughout the US, so you're never scrambling before your tournament. Stop by their booth to buy, sell, or trade at upcoming regional championships, Magic Con, Spotlight Series, and more. I love their selection of individually scanned high-end cards that show you exactly what you're buying. And the best part is saving 5% on every order with promo code BOSH. From Ancestral Recall to Zombie Master, get what you need quickly and in one place at TOAMagic.com. Eternal lives here. One thing that I think is interesting about the Entomb ban is I thought Troll of Khazad-dûm would become unbanned if Entomb was banned. Troll seems like a cool way to build a tempo deck that still uses Reanimate, but there is no insane button anymore. Like I think spending 2 cards at 6 life on a difficult to block creature that you could remove is a cool way to take that, as long as it's not subsidizing also a nut combo. Maybe we'll get Troll of Khazad-dûm back in the future. Maybe they're just happy to leave all of these Reanimate enabler things gone. To be determined. The other card that got banned, Nadu Winged Wisdom, which they refer to as a power level outlier that has flown under the radar. And then they cite their experience in Modern, where the Nadu decks obviously obliterated Modern. Nadu is much more oppressive there than it ever was in Legacy. But in Modern, the deck was played less often and constructed differently than it was in paper because of how miserable it was to execute it in Magic Online, which masked a lot of the real win rate and denied a lot of data points. And it seems here that they were pretty surprised by both Nadu Midrange and Nadu Breakfast and how well both of those decks did at Eternal Weekend compared to their online numbers. They talk here about Nadu Breakfast, and they actually like Nadu Breakfast being a deck, or at least they like Cephalid Breakfast being a deck. They call it it's often a deterministic kill when it combos, repeatedly targeting Cephalillusionist with a lot of the same cards that play well with Nadu, to use in combination with Archamoeba, Dread Return, and Thassa's Oracle to seal the deal. With this deck, the opponent has very clear points where interactive hate is going to be effective. The power level can vary a bit more week to week because of that interactivity, and is cool for the deck to be part of the format. And I agree. All of those things that they said about Cephalid Breakfast are true. I don't necessarily think they should get 2 combos, and it seems Wizards agrees, but at its core, a counter or a combo deck that requires 2 different cards to come together and then has to beat counterspell, creature removal, and graveyard hate. Like any one of those things can interact with the combo at different points. That is healthy and cool for a Legacy power level format. And then they move on to the mid-range Nadu deck. The mid-range version of Nadu are credible at going over the top what other players are doing. True. to a degree that it feels like the opponent is comboing, albeit in a way that is non-deterministic, takes a long time, is difficult to resolve, physically difficult to represent, and can take a long time to kill the opponent despite the game effectively being decided. Yeah, those are common criticisms of the Nadu deck. I have been making jokes lately on paper coverage for Eternal Weekend. There were a bunch, and I just did commentary for 2 full days at the DMV Legacy League this past weekend, and every time Nadu starts being targeted and you need to pull out supplemental objects, like a token indicating 0, 1, and 2, and then you're moving cards physically around the battlefield based on what part of your combo has been executed, that's probably a bad sign for the health of playing that deck in paper. The deck is far more resilient to hate than other combo decks by virtue of it being a bunch of creatures that could play a normal game of Magic in the face of cards like Pithing Needle that could aim to attack the combo angle. This deck's power level, difficulty to attack, and undesirable play patterns has us acting against Nadu a bit more aggressively than we normally prefer to act against cards in Legacy, but we believe it is in the best interest of Legacy's health. So it is interesting that it seemed they were cool with Cephalid Breakfast, Nadu Breakfast. It was the Nadu mid-range deck that put it over. No mention of the Nadu Elves deck, but I think that's okay. That's the 3rd most popular Nadu deck, the 3rd most successful Nadu deck, and by a distant margin. We don't need to acknowledge everywhere the card gets played. There's also the Beach Party deck with Plagon. That's also a Nadu deck. There's also my Nadu Stasis deck that they didn't bother to mention in the article. That's strange. But all jokes aside, Nadu is gone, and I won't miss it. And the strange thing to me is that's where this section ends. I wasn't expecting more bans because they told us what was banned at the top, but a lot of Legacy players, myself included, had Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student, at the top of our Legacy ban list. It's like, if we get one card banned this time around, we hope it's Tamiyo. We expect it to be Tamiyo. We hope to see more than that, but Tamiyo seems like the one that is creating the most miserable play patterns the most quickly, and is the hardest to interact with. And the only mention of Tamiyo in this article is when she appears in deck lists that they've mentioned. 4 Tamiyo in HJ Godix, 2nd place Eternal Weekend deck, 3 Tamiyo in Zio Franconi's deck pulled from Legacy Challenge, 4 Tamiyo in the Nadu Breakfast deck that Johan Larsen top-8 Eternal Weekend with, also cited in here. Tamiyo's showing up in a lot of these deck lists that they've cited as problematic or powerful things to do in lieu of these bans, without actually being mentioned in the typed words of the article at all. And another card that is not mentioned even once, not even in a deck list, is the One Ring, which is something that a lot of people thought action was likely to be taken against. The Mystic Forge combo deck won Eternal Weekend last year. Vexing Bauble got banned, then it just bounced back and won Eternal Weekend this year all the same. And I was expecting at least a paragraph or two of, without a quick combo to supplement Tamiyo, we think that she'll be more fair when the format slows down and people could play removal that handles Tamiyo when they don't have to worry about Atrexa anymore. I don't know if I agree with that, but I don't even see it written down. Same thing with the One Ring, maybe something about the overall win rate of colorless ring decks, or Stompy decks, or Cloudpost decks, or all of these decks that are using the One Ring. There's no mention of those decks at all, much less the card itself being considered for anything. I hope they expand on that in the live stream tomorrow. But before I get into what I think the Legacy metagame will look like next, just talking about the ban philosophy, it still continues to be do less. If we could ban 4 cards, let's ban 2. If we should ban 1 card, let's ban 0 in the instance of last one. But at least we got some bans here. I'm not going to look that gift horse too deeply in the mouth. These 2 bans that they hit are going to change the Legacy metagame, and significantly. These 2 cards represent 3 of the best decks. We are going to feel that, and we are going to see the format change with these things adjusted. And perhaps if we are no longer worried about beating Entomb in 25% of our matches by play rate, we can dedicate more cards to beating something like the One Ring. out of the various shells it's in. Maybe we get to play more pithing needles because we don't need as many surgical extractions. This video is sponsored by Moxfield.com, the easiest way to build Magic decks online. Moxfield supports over 30 formats, including Legacy and everything else you'll see on this channel. There's multiple customizations so you can interact with your deck how you want. Views such as text, grid, or stacks, and groupings like type, subtype, color, color identity, even artist. The site offers light mode, dark mode, and so much more. However you want to see your deck, Moxfield can provide it for you. Follow my Moxfield to keep up with the channel and what I'm playing in paper. I'll see you there. As far as the Legacy metagame itself, I'm not going to go deck by deck here. That's crazy. I'm just going to leave this on the screen as a backdrop while I talk about some stuff that I think might be true. First of all, the Ancient Tomb as a macro pillar was not touched. That's the Mystic Forge deck, Red Stompy, Blue Cloud Post, Eldrazi. These are all top decks that were not touched by the bans at all. Is It Delver is a deck that's been putting up numbers. Roland Chang made a deep run, losing a win and in at Eternal Weekend with Blue-Red Delver. This past weekend at the DMV Legacy League, Is It Delver had a great weekend as well in the hands of two pilots, one of which was also Roland Chang. Is It is massively favored versus One Ring decks, Ancient Tomb decks in general. Like if you have to take 2 damage every time you try to cast a spell, and then you're casting it into a wall of G permission while you're being beat by 3 power 1-drops, and Lightning Bolt can show off to finish you off, and then you go to the sideboard where Meltdown, Null Rod, all this other stuff could kick in, we can see how that would be a fundamentally difficult matchup for decks like that. That gives us a pile of decks that are untouched through the Ancient Tomb no action, and an existing deck that's already good against them. That's a pretty okay rock paper to start this conversation on. The other thing is Tamiyo didn't go anywhere. Fair decks will use her as a hybrid Personal Howling Mind / win the game button if the game goes that way, as they have been. That's Dimir Tempo. For the most part, Jeskai Wizards is another Tamiyo deck that's actually been putting up moderate to successful results. You occasionally see 1 or 2 Tamiyos in the Is It Tempo decks, but the list that Roland has really pioneered just has Delvers instead, just for trying to do damage. There is no side plan. We have Delver, we have Corey Seal Cutter, we have Dragon's Channeler, we have Murktide Regent. Deal 20, figure it out. One of the questions out there for Tamiyo is there another combo deck that can adopt her smoothly and take Reanimator's mantle? The one that comes to mind immediately is Doomsday, which Reanimator and Nadu Breakfast were both terrible matchups for Doomsday. Doomsday just lost its 2 worst matchups that were being played the most. I expect Doomsday to make a large resurgence, and it may or may not adopt Tamiyo as that hybrid plan. Cephalid Breakfast, the combo, is still intact. It no longer gets Nadu as a redundant secondary combo, but Cephalid Breakfast has been a good playable deck for close to 3 years now, basically since Urza Saga was printed, and people started figuring out how good that is in the shell. It can tutor the Shuko, it's a backup plan. The Cephalid Breakfast combo will remain on the menu. It just needs to replace cards like Nadu with either alternate win cons or ways to grind through matchups that have a ton of hate. And if I were rebuilding Cephalid Breakfast to think about how I would grind through with an alternate game plan, I would start with Tamiyo. There we go. Step in the right direction. Nadu midrange simply doesn't exist anymore. That deck was entirely built around the interaction of Nadu, and it wasn't backup plan, it wasn't a side plan. That's gone. We don't have to think about that deck anymore. The Nadu Elves deck, Traditional Elves and Cradle Control are both decks that still exist. Traditional Elves lost a terrible matchup in Reanimator, still has a different terrible matchup in Mystic Forge combo. Still not a good card versus Orcish Bowmaster, or not a good deck versus Orcish Bowmaster, but it's something you could do if you were into tapping lots of creatures and Gaia's Cradle to natural order out Atraxa. Dimir Tempo is completely unfazed. You don't have to play 3 main deck Nile Spellbombs anymore. Those are flex slots that just opened up. And Dimir has a good Is It Tempo matchup, and it has tools to beat the Ancient Tomb decks. If the default Ancient Tomb decks are rock and Is It Tempo is paper, I don't really want to call Dimir Tempo scissors because it's scissors that cut paper but might also cut rock a good amount of the time. I also like that Dimir Tempo gets Thoughtseize, where if we're going into a more open field where we don't know what people are going to be doing necessarily, or if other combo decks that were held down by Reanimator, decks like Doomsday that I already mentioned, I've not mentioned Oops All Spells yet, a deck that lost 2 bad matchups and lost the meta position that people were main decking tons of graveyard hate against. I think Oops All Spells is due for a resurgence here. Show and Tell lost a terrible matchup, and Show and Tell has picked up Stock Up and Mistrise Village over the last year of printings, but that has been held down by Reanimator. Thoughtseize is good against all of those decks. Dimir Tempo, I almost think it's the default fair deck right now, but blue-red is also phenomenal. Like, I think the decision to go slower and bigger with Dimir versus faster and more punishing with Izzet is an interesting one for Tempo players to make. The Azorius Velia deck is untouched. I was sure we were losing Tamiyo, so I haven't really thought about the deck much for the last month, but it is fully intact. And in this Tamiyo metagame we might be entering, white removal like Prismatic Ending and Caracas, not really white, you could put that in any deck, but it's better in white decks. Those might help keep the Tamiyo mirrors at bay. That is part of the construction of the Azorius Blink deck, was keeping Tamiyo in mind. A bunch of the flex slots in that deck were designed specifically for the metagame that just changed, which means you'll have to rebuild a little bit of it. And Pokemoki has already done that. I'm recording this like 2 hours after the ban list went live, and Pokemoki has already tweeted his day 0, minute 0 updates for the Azorius Velia deck. And follow him on socials if you want that content. And people, it's me, I'm people. Anytime there's a shakeup in the format, want to try control. That could be something like Jeskai Wizards, that could be the return of Up the Beanstalk. Those are decks that just have been a little too slow, a little too clunky in that hyper-aggressive metagame. Those sorts of Plowshares-centric control decks tend to be positive versus tempo decks. If we think Dimir and Izzet Tempo are going to rise to the top in this new metagame, that's a pretty good place to start. Ancient Tomb decks and decks like Show and Tell can be really tough for control decks. You have to be able to plan for how many basic lands you're going to play to beat the Blood Moon style of decks, how many answers to the One Ring are you going to play, and that could look like Narset in the main, or Bowmaster if you want to be a more aggressive control deck, like Bug Beans. This past weekend at the DMV Legacy Invitational, somebody was on Yorion Beanstalk main decking for Clarion Conquerors. And maybe you have to take extreme measures like that, but if you don't want to lose to Mystic Forge combo, you want to give it a ton of respect, that's one way to do it. But being well positioned against tempo and then using your flex slots and sideboard to attack whatever we think combo is going to look like might not be the worst. And then there's the kind of classic, Legacy classic, permanent-based engine combo control hybrids. These are like Painter Servant and Lands. Those decks still have to figure out how to keep up with Mystic Forge combo, but they were both close to positive versus Reanimator, so they lost a good matchup, and they were both negative against Nadu Breakfast, so they both lost a bad matchup. They lost a slightly good matchup, and they lost a very bad matchup, and their worst matchup, their shared worst matchup, Mystic Forge combo, is still on the loose. I'm not sure what that means for those decks, but people do like playing them. And they are both good against tempo. I would rather be blue-red Izzet Tempo versus Painter than Dimir Tempo. I think I'd rather be Dimir than blue-red versus Lands. I don't know, that actually becomes interesting. Those are all classic decks, just Delver of Secrets, Painter Servant, and Lands. These are decks you could have played 15 years ago. In the combo space, with Reanimator just disappearing from the massive, overwhelming meta share, we've talked about Mystic Forge, talked about Show and Tell, talked about what Cephalid Breakfast might want to do to remain competitive. Oops All Spells, it's going to pop up. Don't get caught unawares. I don't think it's correct to main deck a bunch of Nile Spellbombs or for Delver to main deck a Surgical Extraction like they've been doing anymore. I don't think we need to do that. And by saying that out loud, I am making your game 1s versus Oops All Spells worse, which is what that deck wants. But if you play interaction like Disruptor Flute or Chalice of the Void if you're an Ancient Tomb deck, or obviously Force of Will, Thoughtseize, Daze, those sort of things if you're a blue deck. If you can find passive Graveyard Hate, if there's a reason to put Dothy Voidwalker in your deck, or if you're a Green Sun deck that can have a toolbox with Keen-Eye Curator in it, Endurance in a control deck, like there's things we could still do without anything quite so egregious as main deck Surgical Extraction to respect this deck. I expect Doomsday to be on the uptick, though Doomsday is one of those decks where there are like 7 capable pilots in the world that I'd be really worried about, and then everyone else is just kind of stumbling through it. This deck has high barrier to entry, but a lot of rewards once you get there. And a deck I've called out a couple times on the Eternal Glory podcast as we were speculating on bans is Dredge. If people want to do stuff out of the graveyard, and Entomb is no longer the way to do it, and people are backing off their heavy Graveyard Hate because Reanimator's gone, Dredge might be something that resurfaces. And then depending on if you're a Lion's Eye Diamond build or not, that massively impacts the budget friendliness of Dredge for people trying to get into Legacy. That leaves Cephalid Breakfast in whatever form it takes, Oops All Spells, and Dredge as combo decks that I think might have some heat after these bans. Keep that Graveyard Hate, don't forget about it, but we can't really afford to main deck it anymore if we're going to have to play against a lot more Delver decks. And there it is. I'm going to wrap this up. Eternal Weekend Italy is in about 3 weeks, and then Japan is 2 weeks after that. I will be competing in both of those. This will be the format for both of those. It's grinder mode time. I have a lot of pending requests to play post-ban Legacy or test for Eternal Weekend. The generic open-ended things to play whatever decks I want. I have been managing my release schedule for the past several months around this day, so you will see those decks soon. You won't have to wait 4 weeks to see new Legacy decks. I do have slots open, and I'll be hitting the recording streets as soon as possible to start doing that. I'm glad Legacy has been shaken up. Not quite as much as I would have liked, but it's reinvigorating to at least not have the same format we've had for 9 entire months. I'm going to leave this one here. Like, comment, subscribe, follow along. These new post-ban Legacy decks will start flowing very soon. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.